Today, on Who Are You, one of the great AFL players of the modern era, a six-time All-Australian and a loyal, and it might be argued, long-suffering servant of the Fremantle Dockers Football Club. But both he and I would like to think that much of the suffering is over. But football is just part of the Matthew Pavlich story. And I think he's more than just a footballer. Good morning.
Good morning, Geoff. How are you?
Who are you?
I'm sure we're going to find out. I'm a son, a brother, a husband, a recent father, a uni student, and an AFL athlete.
Dad Steve was an electrician. Mum Jan is a nurse, and you grew up in Kidman Park in Adelaide. Can you describe some of your memories of that experience?
Yeah, Kidman Park is from the working class suburbs of Adelaide, the beach side suburbs, so different to what we see here in Perth. Obviously, the western suburbs is the more affluent and well heeled community. My childhood was unremarkable. It was normal. It was idyllic. It was exactly what any child would really ask for. Plenty of love from mum and dad, a lot of good times and fond memories.
There's you and there is your sister Jessica.
Yep.
Who you've described as the really smart one.
Yeah, well, Jess got the brains of the family. There's no doubting that, and the looks and all the things that I guess come with that.
Between you and for just a short time, there is a boy called Jason.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about Jason and the impact Jason had on your family?
It was something that I didn't really understand until I was much older, and probably by virtue of mum and dad dealing with themselves and amongst the broader family and maybe not exposing me to the trauma and the tragedy that occurred. So I was born in December 31st, 81, and mum and dad fell pregnant with their second child throughout 83, so a couple of years later. And mum's pregnancy was perfect, was going along fine, and she got full term, so went to 9 months, and unfortunately, tragedy struck right at the last minute, and they lost Jason at birth, essentially, and had to deal with that whole process. And
when did mum and dad decide that the kids could know what had happened?
I can't remember the exact moment or the exact age. I must have been of 10 or 11 or 12, or of some comprehension of what would have happened. And
so, how does a 10-year-old react to that news?
Unbelievably surprised, because albeit that there was a gap of 4 years between Jess and I just thought that was normal, and mum and dad loved me and they loved Jess, and they had there was no obvious signs at all growing up that was the case, but clearly underneath all of that they were dealing with an enormous amount of trauma and tragedy at the time, and maybe as a result there was some heaped love and even heightened affection towards me, which I didn't feel at the time, but maybe upon reflection and how you observe other parents and whatnot, it might make sense. And I was actually speaking to mum and dad about this because I hadn't spoken to anyone about this publicly. It's not in the public arena, and it didn't really occur to me to ask them, because I think it's a part of us, and we're obviously honouring Jason and his extremely short life by speaking about him and whatnot. But I had to ask mum and dad, look, are you guys comfortable with speaking about this? And they were like, yeah, completely, we think it's the right thing, and we're happy to, obviously it's over 28 years ago. So
yeah, you're a new dad. And I wonder, all these years on, whether you have another reaction to what that experience must have been like.
Having only 12 weeks ago, have gone through the process of being a father and becoming a father and seeing birth and the 9 months in pregnancy and trying to fall pregnant and all the bits and pieces that go along with it. It's pretty overwhelming, to be frank.
It tells you what a parent's life is,
Yeah.
in that kids will never quite know what mum and dad's world was all about.
100% spot on. And it was not until I knew my mum and dad loved me, but it wasn't until Harper was born. And, it's not an immediate reaction, or for me it wasn't when Harper was born. It was probably 3 or 4 hours later. I was like, wow, look at this little girl, look at this thing that Lauren and I have made. That I realised, your mum and dad seriously love you. And it was that appreciation when she was born and sort of taking you through, Jason's experience and what they had to deal with. Yeah, the appreciation levels go through the roof.
Were you a nice kid?
Yeah. Yep. I think it was, yeah.
I was reading a quote from your dad in which he said, he hasn't changed at all, which is great. He's obviously matured into a man now, but his behaviours are still the same. So what were you like as a kid?
I was a kid who loved having fun, loved being outdoors, loved playing sport, tried his hardest in the classroom, had leadership roles and prefect sort of roles throughout school, loved his mates, was really loyal to the people he liked and really loyal to the people that liked me back, and had fun around the neighbourhood, sort of never any trouble, but, just the normal stuff any other teenager would do growing up.
That word loyal comes back again and again as being, well, you've been very loyal to the football club,
yeah,
but indicative of who you are. Was that instilled in you, that loyalty mattered?
Yeah, I think it must have been. I mean, there is an enormous sense of, in my family, particularly Dad's side of the family, of how important family is, and gatherings, all having fun and messing around together. And Dad played footy, and his uncles my uncles played footy, and so that mateship of going out to battle, and then afterwards, celebrating the win or commiserating the loss, and my Dad's parents used to have all of their footy mates around, and their families around. It was all about how important the family was, and that little community that you built around your immediate family. But
it would seem that there's also a sense of responsibility that goes with that, and a leadership role that goes with that. Now, I can look at you now and say, well, that's the Matthew Pavlich I see in front of me, but I sense that that's always been there.
Yeah, and I just think that's, I look up to my dad more than anyone else that I look up to in the world, and see, he was my childhood idol, and I loved footy and other sports and whatnot, and appreciated what guys did on the field. But, the values that Dad has and the way he's gone about his life is exactly how I would like to, if someone's reading out at my funeral, the eulogy and, sort of some of the words that would describe Dad, hopefully I've lived up to those to this point and continue to do so. And
I would suggest that might be the nicest compliment your father will ever hear, or any father would hear, is a son that says, I really would like to live my life the way you did.
Yeah, and look, and we're different people, so it's probably even greater a compliment in that he's an electrician by trade who's found himself into human resources, essentially. And can pick up any sort of nook and cranny and put it together in 2 seconds. I'm completely hopeless for that type of stuff. And I've been to university. Dad didn't do that. So we're very different people, and yet the broader values that he lives and has lived, I think, are an enormous path, an enormous thing that I can sort of live up to.
On Who Are You this morning, my guest is Matthew Pavlich. And I want you to tell me why we're going to hear this Pearl Jam song, which has the longest title of any song we've ever played in this segment. What's the song, and what does it mean to you?
The song is Elderly Woman Behind the Counter in a Small Town.
Of course it is.
On Versus, their second sort of major album that came out. Pearl Jam is a grunge group that I grew up with in my teenage years. I think 91, 92 was when Nirvana rolled onto the scene, and with their smash hit and Smells Like Teen Spirit, and all this grunge music started to take off, and that was basically my formative years, really. And this song's important because there's a few poignant lines in it, but it's basically about people from small towns, and like it or not, both Adelaide and Perth are relatively small towns, and I think there's some poignancy there with regard to my life, going back to Adelaide, but, obviously always trying to remain the same person as when I left.
I seem to recognize your face fade away. Hearts and thoughts, they fade away. Hearts and thoughts.
That's Pearl Jam. Matthew Pavlich is my guest on Who Are You. I don't want to talk a lot of footy with you today, but I do want to ask you, because I think the story is pretty fantastic. At the age of 17, you hope that you're going to be picked up by one of the Adelaide teams. That makes perfect sense. And nothing happens. And then in 1999, you're picked up by the Dockers, and you're always asked, I guess, what is your memory of that life-changing day?
I was pretty convinced leading into the draft that I'd end up at Freo. At the time, we had 3 of the top 5 draft picks, and Richmond weren't interested, who had pick 3, and Collingwood had basically committed to Josh Fraser at that time at pick 1. So I basically, leading into the draft, thought I was going to be a Docker.
And I only want to talk about the arrival.
Well, my very first training session is memorable for all the wrong reasons. I collapsed on my very first training session. I'd arrived the previous night from Adelaide after a week or so long down at sort of schoolies or leavers week with my mates and having a good time and sort of rejoicing in finishing exams and all that type of stuff. And Paul Haysby actually picked me up my first morning, and he drove me to Aquinas College where we were preparing for training. And what happens these days with all the rookies and draftees that get drafted, they hardly drop a bead of sweat in their first week at the club because they're screened and the doctors see them, the physios check them out, the strength and conditioning officers go through everything, and they don't do much. But back in my time, 14 years ago, we were expected to do the entire first session. So I think we did about an hour and a half of ball work, and then we finished the session with 6 1K time trials. And I went as hard as I could in the ball work part of it, obviously trying to impress and make an impression and all those types of things as a young 17-year-old would do. And then on the very final 1K time trial, the 6th one, I just started to feel really average and really poor and started to drop off the back of my group and of my running group. And I passed out. I collapsed, and I don't remember anything basically from that, taking off that last lap. And apparently what happened, Jeff Boyle, our physio, and Ken Withers, our club doctor, is still with us now. And I think Stephen Platt and Pat Watson, the property guy, threw us in the back of the property van, raced down the freeway to Murdoch Hospital, threw us in intensive care, and there I stayed for 2 nights. So I was actually meeting some of the players for the first time, outside of saying g'day on the track, coming into hospital saying, geez, what happened? How are you going? So,
how soon after that did you bang into the back of Troy Cook's car?
A week.
A week?
Yeah, a week later. We had a recovery session down at Port Beach, and we're driving back to the football club, and it was sort of mid-morning traffic, and a couple of the players were doing the wrong thing, sort of darting in and out of traffic, and I was just trying to be the sensible one at the back and just thought I'd, sort of wait for everyone. And I'd obviously looked down to change the station at some stage on the radio and looked back up, and Cookie's car was a millimetre in front of me, and I went up his rear end, and my bonnet actually basically started flicking up. And I had to catch it outside of, believe that I had to catch this bonnet, stuck my hand out the window. Thank God the window was down, and threw it back down. And anyway, we got back. Get arrested for that sort of stuff. I shouldn't be divulging it. But anyway, it was a really bad way to start an AFL career. If you're out there listening and you're a young guy or trying to get onto an AFL list, don't do it.
Don't do any of those
way.
things. I'm not even going to talk too much about the intervening years because we know a lot about them. But I want to provide another quote from your dad, which is this, where he says, "We are through and through Dockers with purple and white blood, and we just want the side to do well. But there is always tremendous pressure on him to do everything right all the time." Do you feel that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, as captain and leader of the team, both performance-wise, but every waking moment, it's about doing the right thing. Clearly, there's been a lot of examples in the past where sports people, unfortunately, make the wrong choices and make sometimes what we would term an easy choice and decide to go down the path of indulgence. And clearly, that doesn't help the individual, but clearly it doesn't help the team or the club or the broader AFL. So it's an enormous amount of pressure and responsibility that I've taken on. And I think if you sort of go through when I first took over the captaincy from Peter, We had an enormous amount of experience, sort of both the car boys, McManus, Peter himself, Shane Parker, Cook, Walker. We had a massive transition period and then drafted on all the players you see today, Hill, De Boer, Fife, Morabito. So sort of dealing with that transition, a couple of poor seasons of rebuilding and then seeing possibility in some of these younger players. All the time trying to do the right thing by them and try to do the right thing by performing for the fans. It's a delicate balance.
Have there been times you haven't liked it very much?
Yeah, when we lose. I'm extremely competitive and have always, in anything that I've been involved in, wanted to be successful at it and drive as hard as I can to achieve. And football being the thing that pays my bills and is my absolute passion in life, I don't like losing.
But you've lost a lot.
Yeah, I've won a lot as well.
You have, but of the great modern players, you've spent much of your career with a club that others deem to have underperformed. We argue now that the situation's different. But what do you learn from losing?
You learn how to review, you learn how to analyse, self-analyse and team analyse. You learn the character of not only yourself but of other individuals in your team and how they react to poor performances or conversely good performances. Sometimes you learn as much, on the other hand, when you play well, how guys react and how you react. But ultimately, you learn that the values and behaviours that you agree to as a group and that you try to model yourself stand up. And regardless of what happens, 4 points go your way or not, they're your guiding light.
I know you're heavily involved with the Players Association. I'm not sure that I imagine Matthew Pavlich ever becoming a coach. The Players Association matters to you, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's and particularly the last little period with the collective bargaining agreement with the AFL, the new TV rights, and we've seen an enormous evolution since I've been in the game to now, but even more so the last 4 or 5 years, and having a seat at the table next to Demetrio and next to Fitzpatrick and has been a really important part of the process for the greater players. But it's also been an enormous learning curve for me. So, it's been valuable for the development that I can see for later on in my life. But clearly there's a greater good, and that greater good is the legacy that we leave as current players to the players in the future.
When I made that observation that you see yourself as more than just a footballer, and I think you make that observation with due respect to everyone you play with. But beyond the game, we know that you've done a lot of study. Beyond the game, what do you think life is going to look like for you?
A bit more red wine to start with. I enjoy drinking red wine. You don't really get to consume alcohol that much in our sport. I joke. What I would like to do is continue to push and challenge myself. As I said previously, I've always liked to achieve and always liked to drive myself to greater things. But, with an intense view in the next period of my life that, hey, look, you're going to have a family and I want to spend as much time with them as possible. So it's going to be a good balancing act and a good conversation with Lauren when we get to that stage of transitioning out of the AFL about, okay, what's going to give us the best capacity to live life as a family, but also what's going to give us the best capacity to achieve our goals.
Do you know what that job is that you'd like to do? Because you are accumulating a lot of professional wisdom.
Yeah. Well, I've sort of been rounding that out, as you mentioned, with university along the way. I did a Bachelor of Science, sort of human movement, some psychology stuff as an undergraduate. I'm now back doing an MBA, and a lot of the MBA units, except for some of the core financial ones, are human resource based, and a lot of it's the practical stuff that I've learned on the job for 14 years, 15 years. It's just rounding and fleshing out the theory and actually sort of helping problem solve by virtue of some of the theoretical background. So, look, I think I've always had an eye on it, and I've always been really mindful that this career and this industry can eat you up really quickly. The exact path, I'm yet to know.
And when football finishes, I'm sure there'll be sadness, there'll be ovation and acknowledgement. But will there be relief that Matthew Pavlich, to some extent, is Matthew Pavlich, private citizen, father, red wine drinker?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There's a part of this life that I've chosen to live and this industry that I'm involved in that I could do without. But that said, the core elements of football and the core elements of being an athlete are the things I love: being competitive, being in a team environment, chasing a collective dream, all that sort of stuff. So I'm not sure if the word's relief, but I'll know the right time, because I'll know my body can't give any more, and I'll be absolutely satisfied that I've left nothing left in the tank. I'll be spent, and both mentally and physically. So I'll be really content to say thank you and goodbye.
Are you happy?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, I've got a fantastic wife, an adorable sort of 12-week-old girl, and I've been able to do the thing that I've always wanted to do and play AFL football, and I've been able to sustain that for a long time. And I was actually awarded life membership at the AFL last year, and I know my dad and I was talking about his brothers before they played for West Torrens in the SANFL, and how highly they regarded being a life member of their football club and a life member of the SANFL. And I probably didn't give the award of life membership to the AFL its due respect until I sort of reflected upon some of those conversations I've had in the past. And to have that longevity and durability in a pretty intense, analytical, high-pressured environment, I don't take for granted.
Yeah, some people flinch in professional sport when you use that phrase, role model. I think perhaps it has sat better with you than it has with most.
Yeah, I think so. I understand because I grew up not only idolising my father, but idolising AFL players, Australian cricketers, golfers, tennis players. So I get it. Like I sort of, and in some sense, I welcome that, because I know that not everyone's going to idolise their dad, and I know that not everyone's going to idolise their best mate. So, for the kid who's out there kicking the footy in the front yard with no other mates because of whatever reason, they need to look up to someone. They need something good in their life, and something to really hold on to. So why not that be an AFL athlete?
Great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Geoff.